So this is a lecture series, part of Arches, and also the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning here at University of Arizona, our school lecture series. I'm very happy to have Kath Scanlon as a Distinguished Policy Fellow and Deputy Director of the London School of Economics, London, a research group based at the London School of Economics and Political Science. In her research, she studies social and affordable housing policy, co-housing, community-led housing supply issues, and the impact of housing on local residents. Today, she's going to be presenting low-cost housing in a high-cost city, London's approach to affordable housing. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Kath.
Thank you for that. Everyone always starts by saying it's a real pleasure to be here today talking to you. But in my case, I really mean it because as you may or may not be able to tell from my accent, I did not grow up in London. I grew up in Douglas. So presenting at the U of A is a real treat for me. So have worked for 26 years at the London School of Economics on housing policy across a whole range of issues and across all of the main tenures. And I've done a lot of comparative housing policy looking at the UK and London specifically and compared to Europe and European cities. So I'm going to talk today about affordable and social housing in London. Just to get an idea of the audience, could the people in the room at least raise your hands if you have been to London? Wow, what a cosmopolitan group. That's great. Who has lived in London? Okay, thank you. The people who have lived in London are not allowed to correct me on any matters of detail, okay? You can save that for the end. And thank you. I see some hands online. Thank you. Who has been to Douglas? About the same. I'm actually really surprised by that. I expected to see not very many hands. Okay, well, we can have a little micro session about Douglas's problems after this, maybe. But, right. So I'm going to start with some just basic stats to orient us. So we're here in Arizona. The population of the state is about 7.5 million, and it has 113,000 square miles. And Phoenix, the capital, while not the oldest city, it was founded in 1867. So London has actually a bigger population than the whole state of Arizona. The population's a little over 9 million and growing fast. The land area is less than 1% of Arizona's land area because it's just a city, and it's roughly equal to the incorporated areas of Phoenix, Tempe, and Glendale. So not the whole of the Phoenix metro area, but just those 3 cities. It was founded by the Romans in 43 AD. Before I get into the specifics of how the affordable housing system works, there are some general things that we need to understand about the differences between the governance systems in the States and in Arizona and in England. So in England, the system of government is entirely centralized. So whereas under the US Constitution, power flows upwards from the people, in England, power flows downward from Parliament. Parliament holds all the power and it allocates the powers to subnational levels of government, like counties, like districts, and like cities, like London. Parliament also decides all of the main aspects of planning and housing policy. The whole planning and housing framework is determined by Parliament, and cities implement it. They have a little bit of freedom to tweak things at the margins, but it's not possible for them to implement a completely separate housing policy in the way, for example, that San Francisco could have a separate approach to Houston. Similarly, local governments are not fiscally autonomous. They do not have the power to raise new taxes. They can implement those taxes that Parliament allows for them. The main one is called council tax. It's related to property tax, but most of their money comes as a grant from central government. Finally, housing benefit, which is a welfare payment given to people to help with their housing costs, is an entitlement for the households who qualify for it. It's part of compared to the US, generous welfare benefit system known as the welfare safety net. And if you qualify for housing benefit, you get it as of right. So you all know the stuff in the right-hand column. States and municipalities have lots of policy autonomy. And for me, as a comparative housing researcher, that's fantastic because if I'm looking for some interesting example of how some problem could be approached, I just look at what local governments are doing in the states, because there are thousands of different policy approaches and you can find some very interesting stuff. Municipalities have independent tax raising powers, and housing vouchers are cashless. So those are just kind of background things to keep in mind when we're talking about the specifics. So you're all students of planning, or many of you. And the fundamental one of the fundamental differences between the British and the American planning system is that in the UK, land ownership does not, the bundle of rights that land ownership conveys does not include the right to build on your land. There's no zoning that gives you an automatic right to develop a certain kind of structure or scheme. Those rights were nationalized by Parliament in the aftermath of World War II, and government technically owns all rights to develop land. So if you want to build a residential scheme on your land, you apply for planning permission, and the local authority grants you permission because they own the permission, right? So they grant you permission and they can make lots of conditions on that. Planning permissions, as I said, there's not a zoning system. Every single scheme that goes through, the developer approaches the local authority and says, here's what I'd like to do. I want to build 150 homes and, you know, some shops and health center. Let's have a discussion about it. So there's a negotiation. These negotiations can take a very long time. For big schemes, 2 or 3 years is not uncommon. But each individual scheme is negotiated. The process is very flexible and very site specific, but also very time consuming and expensive for the developers and for the local authorities. The other very important thing to know about the planning system around London is that while in urban economics, we learned that as the city grows, development moves out to the periphery, and residential developments colonize at the edges what used to be agricultural land. And we can certainly see that pattern around Phoenix and lots and lots of Arizona cities. That cannot happen in London because lateral growth is constrained by what's known as the green belt. That is a protected area of land. It ranges in width from about 10 miles to 25. And that was another thing that was designated in 1947. They basically drew a line around what was then the developed area of London and said, that's it. Nothing can be built beyond what was there in 1947. So you have streets on the edge of London where one side of the street is a row of houses and the other side of the street is a field with horses in it because nothing more can be built. So that means that whatever new is built in London to accommodate the growing population, it has to be densification of existing land uses. So the main goals of London's housing policy are to build enough new homes to accommodate the population growth and the backlog, because we haven't built enough new homes to accommodate population growth since about 1980. So there's a very big backlog of overcrowded households. To build enough affordable homes to house people in need. So housing policy in London is mainly about new homes, even though new homes account for less than 1% of the stock every year. Because under this system where central government allocates out powers to municipalities, the London government doesn't have much power over existing homes. For example, the mayor, Sadiq Khan, would love to be able to implement rent control to address very high rents in the private rented sector. He doesn't have the power. He's written lots of well-argued documents about why he should be given the power. Zero chance that he's going to get that, so he just doesn't have the power. But he does have a relatively generous budget for affordable housing construction. The budget was given to him by central government. At the moment, he controls around 12 billion pounds, which is about $16 billion for affordable housing over the next 4 years. So I mentioned that London's population is growing. From the over all of the 19th and most of the 20th century, London's population grew. And then in the middle of the 20th century, there was an exodus of people from dirty, old, crowded, slummy London to move to the nice, healthy suburbs. That was partly driven by the people's own decisions, and it was partly an explicit government policy to build some new towns on the edges and get people out of nasty London. That changed both there was a kind of re-centralization of people deciding they wanted to live back in the city, and a change in government policy in the 90s. And London is now growing rapidly again. The population is about 9 million now, and that is expected to reach 10 million by 2026. That's higher than it's ever been. So clearly there's a question about housing supply. The maps on the bottom for the one in the middle is an actual regular map of the UK. I got a little pointy thing here. Well, never mind. Scotland is the bit at the top. It's a little bit different from England in planning terms. We won't discuss that. England is the 2/3 at the bottom. So that's the physical map in brown, and that's an equal population cartogram on the right. That's where every square has the same population, as opposed to every square has the same area in the brown map. And you see that London is at the bottom there, like this huge pregnant stomach hanging off of the UK, because it's really disproportionately centralized in London, the population and all the power. London is an expensive city. This is the cost of owner occupation, the development since about 1970 to the most recent compared to England. London's always been more expensive than England, but the gap has been increasing. And even though prices in London have fallen since about 2020, the average price of a home is around £500,000, which is in dollars about $675,000. And what that will buy you, what the typical home would be in London, is a 2-bedroom apartment. That's what these figures are talking about. So looking at the pattern of housing tenure, the black bars at the bottom are owner occupation. The kind of mid blue bars are social rented housing, and the top ones are privately rented. So there was a big growth in social housing in the 1960s and 70s, as a lot of it was built after World War II. And then in 1980, Mrs. Thatcher, conservative prime minister, was elected, and she instituted a policy called right to buy. And that allowed people who were tenants of public housing, council housing, to buy the homes that they lived in at a very substantial discounts. So that was quite a popular policy amongst the tenants, not so popular among lots of housing advocates, but a lot of housing was sold off through right to buy. She also forbid the local authorities from using the receipts from that money to build new housing. So the housing stock shrank quite a bit. So currently, we're at about half the households in owner occupation, 30% in the private rented sector, and 23% in social rented sector. And interestingly, that owner occupation rate in Arizona, about 69%, that's almost exactly the same as as England. London has a lower owner occupation rate. That tends to be the case in cities. I don't know the figures for Phoenix and Tucson, but I'm sure you guys do. So I'm going to talk now for most of the rest of the talk about social housing. I think it's not maybe a term in widespread use here, but it's the common term used in both Britain and across Europe for housing that is provided at below market rents or prices to eligible households. And it always involves some kind of subsidy, either an explicit financial subsidy or some cross subsidy from profits or subsidy in the form of free or low cost land. There are lots of ways of designing the subsidy. In England, social housing is normally rented. That's not the case everywhere. In Spain, for example, it's usually purchased. And there are two types of landlords: local authorities or councils or municipalities or whatever you want to call them. They were historically the main providers. They now own about 40% because of the loss of all this stock through the right to buy. And housing associations. They are private, nonprofit organizations, often charitable. They have charitable constitutions, but many of them, the biggest ones now are basically like major corporations. They're very big developers who develop market housing as well as social housing and use the profits from the market sales to subsidize their social housing. Now, confusingly, social housing is not synonymous with affordable housing, at least not in the London policy context. Social housing in London refers to housing that is built with specific requirements about who can live in it and specific government controls on the rents. And it's very, very inexpensive. So it caters for the people with the lowest incomes. But market housing is so expensive in London that you have very low cost social housing, very expensive market housing. You have a huge gap in the middle where people on middle incomes can't afford housing. New York, San Francisco, all of the high cost cities in America have the same problem. So we have a whole range of intermediate housing products on the right-hand side. There are 7 listed there in London. There are a couple more I haven't added. I'm not going to talk about those, but we can discuss them if you're interested in the details. But all of those are meant to address some segment of this intermediate market. But I'm going to focus here on social housing, which is the most, maybe the most well, I don't know if it's the most interesting, the most different from the States. We have a very large social stock relative to most US cities. It's 23% of all housing in London is socially rented. So that's, and the other affordable things are on top of that. So this is just social rented. So that's a lot compared to most American cities, although it has shrunk because it was higher before. London is made up of 32 separate local authorities, 33 actually, within the overall umbrella of the Greater London Authority. And some of those individual local authorities have up to 40% social housing. So there's a lot of social housing in London. The distribution across the city reflects that historic pattern of construction that I mentioned. In the post-war period, there was a very, very big wave of council house construction, both to replace areas that had been designated as slums that were seen as worn out and old and unfit for human habitation. The ones of those that are left are now regenerated, very expensive, desirable housing, but a lot of it was destroyed and rebuilt as social housing. And also there was a lot of bomb damage in London from the Battle of Britain in World War II. So lots of big bomb sites close to the center, and a lot of social housing was built there. So it means that we have higher amounts of social housing in inner and central London than in the suburbs, which is not a pattern everywhere. Like, for example, if you go to Paris, in Paris, the expensive housing is in the center, and when the social housing was built in the periphery, but it's different in London. So those schemes that were built in the 60s and 70s were single tenure schemes. They built whole big estates of only social housing, similar to big public housing projects in the States. The current practice is now completely different. It's not actually permitted to build big single tenure estates. All new residential schemes are required to be mixed. So to have a mix of market housing and affordable housing, and within the affordable housing to have a certain proportion of social housing, and then the discussions at the level of the planning permission will get down to very granular details of where the social housing will be located in the scheme, what floors it will be on, how many units per floor and things. So it's quite prescriptive. And most previously single tenure estates now are actually in fact mixed because of the right to buy. In desirable areas in London and other cities, or where people had incomes that could allow it, there are some estates where 80 or 90% of the homes on what was formerly a social housing estate, 80 or 90% are now private ownership. And once they're privatized, once they are bought by the first tenants, there's no there's a minimum time period they have to hold them. I think it's 5 years, but after that, there's no subsequent control. So they're simply market housing. They can be sold or rented to anyone. Only the I'm not going to go into the details of allocation, but it's not actually based on income technically, but in fact, in practice, only those in the most need can expect to get social housing. And London has a very big homelessness problem at the moment, not so much evidenced in people sleeping in the streets, but other kinds of homelessness. And in many local authorities now, 75 or 80% of the units that are become available as social housing go to homeless households. So if you are just a low-income working person with a not very nice home and a very crowded, you have no chance of getting social housing. It's really for the supply is not enough. The tenure security and the lack of affordable alternatives mean that tenants typically stay a very long time, often until they die. So turnover is very low. Okay, now some pictures. I will take you on a quick tour of social housing in London. So those of you who've been there may recognize some things. This is a picture that was taken on the site of what is now, well, around the corner from my office at the London School of Economics. It was one of the worst areas of slums documented by Charles Booth, who did some very famous maps of poverty levels in London, house by house in individual streets. These were some of the most crowded, vile, unhealthy slums in London, and they were all demolished in the late 19th century and replaced with beautiful new buildings. And social housing was built for these tenants in nearby areas. The first social housing was not actually built by local authorities. It was built by philanthropists. And one of the leading philanthropists was an American. He was called George Peabody. He also did lots of philanthropic things back east. He's from near Boston, Massachusetts. And one of the largest housing associations in England is still Peabody. It's a very big housing association and developer. And this is an estate in Chelsea in the kind of one of the poshest parts of London, typical red brick construction around a courtyard. And this is still standing. And there are lots of these estates. If you walk around, Deirdre and I had a lovely walk around Soho and Covent Garden. And there are a lot of Peabody estates that look a lot like this and still entirely operated as social housing. The first council housing, public housing, was the Boundary Estate in Shoreditch. This was built in 1890. It radiates out from a central kind of circular park, which is where the picture's taken from. And it was built by London County Council on the site of a demolished slum. Now, incredibly desirable housing. Shoreditch is one of the hippest and most nighttime active parts of London. And actually, what one of my students lives here, and she's considers herself very lucky to live in such a cool area. Now we go to after World War I. There was a program of building council housing for the soldiers who were returning from the war. And these were called homes for heroes. So rather than flats, these were little houses, little terraced houses, little townhouses, I guess you'd call them, with sharing the walls with the neighbors, with front gardens and back gardens designed to allow people to have some space to grow vegetables and things. And I guess similar kind of impetus to the GI Bill in the States to say people serve their country during the war, we need to make sure that they're taken care of in terms of housing and stuff. But the GI Bill was about mortgages, whereas this was about social housing. After World War II, we move into the kind of period of, I guess this would be, if you ask somebody in London, what is social housing like? What does it look like? They would probably describe something like this. So concrete tower blocks, these were the first tower blocks built as social housing. In London, these are 6 18-story towers. They're very, very close to central London. This is about, it's less than a mile from the Houses of Parliament. And it's very cool if you go to London. It's interesting to go there because in the middle of these 6 towers is a huge sculpture by Henry Moore of a reclining figure. So this was, that was something that was seen at the time as, you want to make these beautiful art-filled places. Also largely now private through right to buy. This is the Alexandra Road estate in Camden, which is a central London borough. In fact, the London School of Economics is in Camden. And in the 60s and 70s, when there was this wave of council house construction, a lot of local authorities had their own construction departments and their own very large architecture departments. And it was quite a prestigious thing to be an architect for one of the big councils. So this was designed by Sidney Cook. And there are coffee table books about Sidney Cook's council house designs, and you can go on walking tours and things. And the little thing in parentheses there, the 2-star, that means the building is listed. It's protected as a building of historic and architectural interest. You're not allowed to make any changes to the physical fabric of the building inside or outside without planning permission. And there are 3 grades, 2 2-star and 1. And so 2-star is the second highest grade. So it's considered very iconic. Okay, so that was the kind of existing stock of social housing, of which we have quite a lot. But what are we building now? We're not building that. Now, rather than big council-led schemes, low-cost housing is mainly a byproduct of market housing. And this is, I guess, analogous to inclusionary zoning in this country. So the legal provision is called Section 106. That's the S106, and that's everyone just calls it that, Section 106 housing. I said before that as a condition of getting planning permission to build a new residential scheme or a new supermarket, the planners can require the developer to meet certain conditions. And almost all development in London must provide a certain proportion of affordable housing. Any residential scheme with 10 units or more has to provide affordable housing. The benchmark is 35%, although certain types of development have to provide 50% affordable housing, which gives you an idea of how extremely out of whack the London housing market is. So this Section 106 mechanism accounts for a little more than half of the new social and affordable housing that is being built. It's usually on the same site as the market housing. It used to be allowed for the developer to build the nice luxury condos in one place and then build the affordable housing around the corner. Not allowed anymore. It also used to be acceptable for them to build the nice condos and just give the local authority some cash, so the local authority could build the housing. Also, that's not allowed anymore. They all have to be genuinely mixed. There's generally no government subsidy. So in effect, it is a tax on development. And if the land market is working properly, and there's full information and all of the criteria are ticked, it should be a tax on the land value. What are the effects in practice? Well, as I said, the current GLA guidance, that's the Greater London Authority, the body that the mayor controls, is that 35% minimum. That's pretty much non-negotiable. And they tried to get up to 50%. The negotiations take time and increase uncertainty, and it relies on the construction of high-price units to subsidize the affordable housing, which arguably just kind of exacerbates this problem of there's low-cost housing and there's very expensive housing and there's not enough in the middle. So then they invent more schemes to address the bit in the middle, adding to that long list that I showed before. So this is a picture of the kind of thing that we are building now. Some people in the room, some of my party will recognize this. This is Lewisham in Southeast London, near where I live. And this is a very high density development right on top of a transport node. There's a train station just off the edge of this picture. And what used to be underneath these buildings was a massive traffic circle. So I don't think they demolished much to build this. There was not much built there. So this is mixed tenure and mixed use, what you would call transit-oriented development. Car-free, no parking. Well, we can talk about that. All right. So councils used to be big in the business of building social housing, not anymore. Mrs. Thatcher and subsequent conservative governments did not like local authorities being in the business of building housing, and so all of those big departments of architects and construction departments and so on were just dismantled. Local authorities are getting back into building things a bit now, but on a very small scale, like 100 units a year or something like that. So these nonprofit organizations are now the main providers of social housing. They range enormously in nature and in size. Some of them are like little church organizations that run a group of 7 houses for, retired vicars or something, and they're a housing association. Some of them have more than 100,000 homes all over the country and are major corporations. So it's a little hard to say general things about housing associations. But all housing associations have as their main function, if you look at their vision or their purpose, it will be to provide affordable housing for people who need it, something like that. So that's the aim of all of them. So they, within their own kind of corporate context, they try to devise ways of doing that. And one of the things that they often do is they develop market housing. They are private developers, want to make as much of a profit from those homes as they can. Nice luxury homes overlooking the river and so on. And then they take those profits to subsidize their social housing. There are also some loans and grants from government, from both central government and local government. But there is currently no equivalent of LIHTC, of the low income housing tax credit. Although when I was reading my emails this morning, there was an email from one of my colleagues in London saying, look at this recent policy proposal from one of the think tanks about introducing tax credits. So the same ideas, are circulating in London as here. Okay, so how is the system working? Is it everything great? Well, depends where you're starting from, I guess. Production of new homes in London has stalled dramatically in the last sort of year and a half. The mayor's target is 88,000 new homes a year. The actual amount produced last year was under 29,000, and the rate this year is way slower than that. So it has almost come to a halt. Developers say that the reasons for that are that the Section 106 affordable housing requirements plus increased costs are making the new schemes unprofitable. And so if they're looking at their spreadsheets, do we start this new scheme? No, we just don't start it because it's not going to make a profit. One of the big drivers of increased costs was you probably all saw the tragic fire, the Grenfell Tower fire that took place in a tower block in West London, very similar looking to one of the ones I showed you, in which 72 people died. And one of the reasons for that was that building, which was built in the 70s, had only a single stairwell that served the whole building rather than two stair cores. So the government has changed the rules about that. It is for any building now taller than 18 meters, there have to be 2 sets of stairs. Reduces the floor area that can be developed, increases costs, absolutely right, but it means that the calculations for what's profitable are different. So construction has declined. And just, I think yesterday, it was announced that City Hall is working on changes to reduce the required contribution from 35% to 20% to try to get the market picked up. Okay. Last couple of slides. So I was thinking about, is there anything we can say about lessons from London for here? And I thought, no, I can't say anything about that because although I grew up here, I haven't lived here for a very long time. I don't know anything about the Arizona affordable housing landscape. That is your expertise, but I can say a little bit about what's different between the two countries. At least it seems to me it'll be interesting to hear your views. In the UK, social housing has been regarded since the 1940s as an integral element of the welfare state, and Britain is a state where the welfare safety net is seen as a very important and across the political spectrum agreed upon part of the national picture. A key aim of housing policy is to build more affordable housing. There is nobody in either political party who wants to build less affordable housing. It's about where it should be, how much, what type it should be, and so on. We have a very big stock of existing social housing, and it's built over more than 150 years, and it's distributed across the urban area. Really, if you look at granular tenure maps of London, you do not find many areas of single tenure social housing or single tenure owner occupation. It is really pepper potted around. Now that is something that is simply impossible to replicate in a city that has already built all of its housing. You're not gonna be able to reproduce that. So that's London has that history. We have very experienced professional social landlords. They are business people and very. It's not the biggest social landlords are very serious, kind of profit-oriented businesses. It's not seen as a necessarily a kind of social vocation to go work for a housing association necessarily. New social housing has political and public support, although there's plenty of NIMBYism about new housing in general, about, you know, somebody building, taking over part of a park and building new homes. That's always going to get a lot of pushback. But the fact that it would have social housing in there, that would be regarded as just like, yeah, obviously it isn't controversial. And the constraints on the lateral expansion because of the green belt and the limited land supply mean that all new sizable new housing developments are very, by Arizona standards, extremely high density. 200, 400 units per acre. It's way beyond any, I mean, I don't think there's anywhere in Arizona that has the densities that are being built in London now. So these are, and this is Arizona's distinctiveness vis-a-vis London. I mean, this is my finger in the air, things about what might be different here that would be helpful or constraining. Well, there's so much undeveloped land, you know, even in the middle of Phoenix, the middle of Tucson, there are things like parking lots, but also just things like corner lots with a sign on it saying land for sale, or corner lots with no sign and just some trash. Now that that is not a feature of London anymore. The freedom of state and local governments to shape their own policies, their own funding mechanisms. I mean, of course, this is a federal system and it's taken for granted here, but your English counterparts are so envious of those freedoms. The car-centered urban infrastructure obviously conditions everything that you're going to do around building, not just affordable housing. And finally, public skepticism about government's role in the housing market. And I have a question mark there because I get a sense, I've spoken to some people in Seattle, I've spoken to some people in the Bay Area. I get a sense that maybe that's changing, but I'm not sure that if that's true. And the relatively at the end was just something I wrote and meant to delete, but there it is still. So that's the end of that, and I look forward to the discussion.
We can take questions in the room. Kenny is also monitoring the chat. If there are questions for those in the online, please enter in the chat.
Yeah, there's a pretty quick one. From Ingrid Downey at Dwell Housing Trust. When you say it is like a tax on land, I think section 6. Is that because the market value of the land drops because of this proposal?
Yes, that's right. So the market value of the land, in principle, it should be a residual. It should be whatever you can get by selling your scheme minus your costs, minus your profit. That's what you can pay for the land. So if the amount that you can get for the scheme is less because you have to supply some affordable housing in there, that has a knock-on effect on the price of the land. That's in principle how it should work if everyone had full information about the process. Now, the challenge in a place like London where planning permission is negotiated is that it's not entirely clear at the beginning of the process how much affordable housing you are going to be required to provide, what types of all that long list, because each one has a different value. So as a developer, you're, finger in the air. Well, I think if I get the land for this much, I can make a profit. You might be wrong. But in principle, yeah, it should come out of the value of the land. Yes, one and then two.
First thing, that's great, learned a lot. When they do large development, some units are set aside social units or affordable ones. Those tend to be the first ones that are purchased through right to buy law.
Okay, so a large new scheme is built and you have some social units that are in there. Let's say that it's a market developer who's doing this scheme, not a housing association. So the market developer has to provide 35% affordable housing in their 100-unit scheme. There are 35 units of affordable housing. The market developer wants to just sell off the units and move on to the next scheme. In the UK, at least, they don't tend to keep any interest in the scheme. It's sold off and a management company takes over. So they want to get rid of it completely, and they certainly don't want to operate that affordable housing. They look for a housing association to buy that affordable housing. So they will pay for it, the housing association. It's not that they get it for free, but it will be much less than the market housing. And then they operate that as social housing. The right to buy only applies to local authority owned housing. It does not apply to housing association housing. There have been attempts to change that. It has not become, it hasn't happened. So if they're owned by housing associations, they're protected from the right to buy. But I told you that local authorities are now getting back into the building social housing on a small scale, sort of 100 units at a time or something. But if they build them as traditional social housing, whoever moves in immediately has the right to buy. So the local authorities have had to do these workarounds where they create private companies owned by the local authority to build this housing, so that then it's not technically owned by the local authority and they're not subject to the right to buy. You had a question.
I was wondering, is there any building requirement that has a life cycle value attached to whatever they're building? 200 years, something like that, or is there any discussion like that? I mean, that's a big difference between here and there. I mean, and
No, and there actually is a lot of discussion now about the need for that, but no, there is that is just not a feature.
and what about home ownership? Or in this country, we've got an awful lot of money on the golf courses. And the banks aren't giving enough interest, so the golf course money is buying up houses just for the land. They'll sit on it for nothing because it probably gains them more value, eventually throwing people out. So you have these people who really have ownership for, 1,000 residents, and they, through a rental game. And that's very cannibalistic kind of.
Well, the highest value use in London, the highest value use of land is residential. You would not, you would, if you're a profit-making developer, ideally what you want to do is get some land that's got a dilapidated factory or something on it, anything, a parking lot, and get it planning permission for residential, because that is by far the most valuable. So it would be unheard of to buy houses and not. You might buy a single family home and see if you can get planning permission to demolish it and build 20 houses on the 20 flats on the lot, but you would never keep the lot to try to do a non-residential use, because it wouldn't be worth it. Let's see, you and there.
The process in England and other places in Europe seems like very contextual with the planning commission and how they are, it's no by right operation. Has there been any studies on the effect of it in terms of staffing, economics, time compared to the United States? Because I mean, even our by right projects take a long time, and I don't know how effective they are in terms of their impact on the surrounding. I don't know, it just seems like such an interesting thing to look at. You look at that?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it, but I know that there is a lot of scholarship that does look at that. And I mean that there have been experts who advocated moving towards a more zoning-based system in Britain, because that would give certainty. It would help the price determination of land. It would accelerate the building process. But it hasn't happened. And I think one of the issues is that it would be very difficult to move from this flexible negotiation-based system to a zoning system, because then the decisions about the zoning would be the decisions that would affect all future development in that area. And the slowness of the planning process for an individual development, if you're thinking, okay, we're gonna do that now for an entire city, you know, I mean, the zoning map wouldn't emerge for 100 years, I
How
think.
many planning commissions are there within London?
33. Yeah,
How many staff is on one planning commission?
I'd say each planning department probably has 25 to 50, maybe. Is that a lot or not a lot?
It's a lot. We have like 3 planners at Tucson.
What? Really? I'll check that and I'll confirm it with Deirdre, but not, there's more than 3, that's for sure. Yes, and then one there, yeah.
My question is, how long will people stay in these social houses? Because essentially government try to encourage people to help them over this tough time to able to get a better job or be a better person, to pay more tax, to able to benefit the social structure overall, and also help the stability for the social structure. Which, like, how long does these people, the people who need social houses, stay in the social houses for how long?
Well, they have the right to stay until they die. There's no, they have complete tenure security. And once they are, the determination is made that they are eligible to live in that home, there's no subsequent reassessment. So if they win the lottery, if they, you know, become a high-paying lawyer, they can remain in that home. And actually there have been a few cases that there was some very well-paid union official who lived in a social a flat in the middle of London, and, you know, was making an enormous salary, but he said, well, you know, it's my house and I'm going to stay, and you can't, no one can force me to leave. And similarly, if people have a big family home and then the family leaves, so that you have a single person or a couple living in a flat with 3 or 4 bedrooms, they do pay an increased rent to reflect that they're living in, it's kind of meant to be an incentive for them to downsize, but they don't have to. If they are happy to pay that increased rent, they can stay for the rest of their lives. So I have one here and then there, yeah.
Shared ownership.
Shared ownership is a kind of intermediate housing, so for owner occupation rather than rental. So it's developed by housing associations, and in London, the qualification for a shared ownership home is that you have an income, a household income of £90,000 or less a year, which is about $120,000 a year. And then you can buy a proportion of the value of the home. It's usually 25% is the starting tranche. And then you pay rent on the remainder to the housing association. Then over time, if your circumstances improve, you can do what they call staircasing up. So you can buy further increments of the value of the home. It used to be that 5% was the minimum, but housing prices are so high in London that now it's 1%. And in principle, it's possible to reach 100% ownership and then it's completely yours outright. In practice, it doesn't happen very often. It works well for certain households, but there are some issues with it. For one thing, even though you only own a proportion of the value of the home, you are responsible for all repairs and maintenance. So that's not very, that's kind of a lopsided equation. And the secondary market for it is difficult because it has to be sold to somebody else who meets the conditions. So and a lot of people, a colleague of mine who has a PhD in housing studies was considering shared ownership. And she said, Kath, I just don't understand it. It's too complicated. And I think, wow, okay, so how is the normal housing market actor going to make sense of this? Was there somebody over here? Yes.
Just to follow up a little bit on your answer to this fellow's question, if a family moves out except the parents, and somebody is looking at a situation and increasing the rent because they want to eventually make it something smaller, does that mean that, you know, are there like COLAs for the price of rent each month, cost of living?
The central government determines, central government decides how much social rents can go up every year. The landlords have no housing association or local authority, they have no say in that at all, it's just decreed to them by central government. And local and central government also tells them what that additional amount is for let's see, the official term for it, I think, is the under occupation supplement, and the popular term is the bedroom tax, but that it tells them what that amount is as well. But some social landlords, some housing associations actually offer financial incentives to their tenants to move out, or they offer them, you know, they say, well, we'll give you £10,000 if you'll leave, and we'll help, you know, we'll find you a 1-bedroom flat, we'll help you move, we'll organize it, you know, we'll organize a declutter. I mean, they really put a lot of effort into getting those big units back so they can house families. But at the end of the day, if the person doesn't want to go, they can't force them.
The converse of that would be, you could, if your income didn't rise as much as the rent, you could be bottomed out and still can afford. I mean, that would be fair.
Yes, except that social tenants are eligible for housing benefit, which is a right. So it can happen, but they are pretty protected. Somebody with very low income, all of their rent would be covered by housing benefit. And so it would be irrelevant really what happened to the rent, because housing benefit would just cover it. Yes. And then behind, yeah.
But there are like statistics showing this certain percentage amount of people who's fully rely on the social benefits, and this amount percent people who's partially rely on like the benefits and welfares, and where people's like literally financial freedoms. Like, did people do that? Like, did government put policies? Because like I'm listening right here, like the supply is not going to the right demand to what I'm hearing right now. But like,
Well,
I think people are benefiting, or people are being helped, and which is great. But like, there are some demands that are not being satisfied because the right supply is not going to the right position. So
Well, you make a very good point that there are 70,000 homeless households in London, actually maybe more, 80,000, and arguably a lot of those are in much greater need of these homes than the people who are occupying the homes. But the system is not set up to kind of dynamically move people in and out of these homes. They're not seen as transitional housing. They're not seen as up and out. These are people, they are regarded as permanent homes, places where people can raise a family, become part of a community, you know, make their lives. And the fact that there are other people who need the homes more, that's just too bad, I guess. Yes.
Well, since you were born here in the United States, you probably pay attention to 2008 era. We went through that housing debacle, I guess is what it was. You know, one of the messages I took from that is that the ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, was being introduced as a way of continuing the financeability of houses, even though the architecture was paying its own way somehow. So you get this 5-year trick, you gotta turn it over. Now, the costs, I mean, as an architect builder, the costs are just getting pretty insane. I mean, I had one of my construction supervisors says, you know, you can't, there aren't enough hardly hours in the day to earn money in order to build a house, which is true. I mean, there just seems to be a housing economics problem that's rumbling in the background here. That I'm sure you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I will hold my tongue on American housing issues, but you're right that there's, in principle, this is a market that should clear. In practice, even in, by European standards, this market is so much more so much less constrained than the housing market in Britain and in Europe, and yet the problems are very similar. Yeah.
Well, on that cheery note. I think we're right about time here, so again, join me in, thank you, Kath, for the.